If you take a second to pause and notice that there is a message behind this behavior, instead of getting stressed out, you're going to be able to help your child and also be able to take care of yourself better. Remember that behavior is always communication. Think about this. They're having these big feelings inside of them, but their brain is unable to process those feelings or find ways to even ask for help. What happens then? Their prefrontal cortex is not yet fully developed. In fact, we know now that the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that is going to help children with their logical reasoning, is something that is still developing till the age of even 25 years old. What does this mean? When their emotions are taking over, or they're having big feelings, or there are things that are very difficult for them to process, whether it's a teenager who's going through hormonal changes or a preteen who has all these big feelings about something, they don't have the capacity, their prefrontal cortex is not developed, so they don't have the capacity to actually regulate themselves. So all of these big feelings are then becoming bigger than their ability to regulate themselves, the skill set that they don't have yet, which is to be able to contain their feelings, which is why this is how it's coming out in a very negative way. So just by reframing your perspective about why is my child being so difficult, to what is my child struggling with right now? What is my teen going through right now that I'm probably not able to see or understand? Asking the right question is the very, very important start that you need to be able to support your child as well as yourself. So let's look at some of these common clues that's going to help you to move from chaos to actually being able to figure this out better. So let's take, for example, a particular unmet need that this child might have. Very often, the child, when they're hungry, they are overtired, or they are overstimulated, they are unable to actually express those needs. Even teenagers, you would be surprised to know that a lot of times teenagers who are probably overtired still keep pushing themselves because they don't realize that this is something that is actually now gone over their limit. So a lot of times these unmet needs are not correctly expressed by the child or your teen. So think about it for a second. Are they reacting badly because there is something here which is underlying and you need to really help them to address it? It could be that they're hungry, they haven't slept enough, their homework ran over, so they had a few days of, a sleep lag. Maybe your child is sensitive to being thirsty or hungry, or overstimulated is another one, which is very, very common now in our children, because there is so many ways in which they are easily overstimulated, because either there's too much information, they are reading too much, they are watching something too much, or they're sometimes even overstimulated by their own feelings about something. So one of those things could be the reason why they are acting out. So that's the first one, the emotional root cause for you to think about. The second one that I want to talk to you about is possible anxiety or stress. Now, if they are having tantrums, or they are having meltdowns, or there is a lot of hyperactivity, like you feel like your child is really talking very fast, asking for a lot of things, or doing things, moving around a lot. Sometimes some children react with hyperactivity, and the underlying feeling with those kind of behaviors is anxiety or stress. It could be anxiety about something that is coming up, anxiety about something that they find difficult to deal with. It could even be a class that they really need to go to and they don't want to tell you, or they're not even admitting to themselves that they have this anxiety. So sometimes they just act out, and sometimes it's stress about an upcoming test, or something to do with even a friend. They have to meet somebody who said something about them previously. So that may, in some cases with sensitive kids, actually create a lot of anxiety. So that's the second one. So the second emotional trigger that you need to look for is anxiety or stress. The third one is to do with lack of emotional regulation skills. Now, this is something that most kids struggle with, because even if they have the ability to either handle their emotions to an extent, when it gets over their limit, then they end up feeling very overwhelmed, and that lack of emotional regulation skills will show up in a way of either yelling, screaming, acting out, or even in public sometimes that happens because they just don't know how to regulate themselves. Now at that point you can either allow yourself to get stressed, or you can step back and realize that this is expected behavior from your child. For whatever reason, they have not yet developed the ability to regulate these big feelings that they have. And they really need your support, because if at that point you end up getting angry with them, irritated with them, or end up shaming them by saying, oh my God, you are such an old child and you still don't know how to behave, or why are you always shouting? This really it's too much for me. You just never listen to me, and I really, cannot with you. That sort of reaction will really make your child feel even worse, because even though they're feeling this lack of emotional regulation skills and they're feeling really overwhelmed and they're acting out, a part of them doesn't really want that. They can't help themselves but act out this way, right? So when we are able to understand that, and we are able to be the people in their lives who can really hold that space for them, really be present with them without allowing ourselves to get dysregulated as well. Because if you get dysregulated, then it is very likely that your child will also get further dysregulated. But if you can at that moment stay present, if you're able to stay regulated, then your child will be able to actually build those skills that are needed in that moment to regulate themselves. It could be taking a deep breath, taking just a minute of a pause. Okay, I know you really wanted that particular video game, which we just passed a store and we saw that video game, and I really know that you have been wanting that for a long time. So let's take a minute here. I know you're extremely overwhelmed and angry or frustrated that this is something you're not getting. Let's take a minute right now, because I need a minute too. You can even say that to your child, that I need a minute. If it triggers you, then you just take a second. Tell them that I just need a minute and I'll come back to you. If it is safe, give yourself that time to come back to your child and then talk to them. If you're able to regulate and talk to them in a way that is calm and composed, they will actually be able to bring themselves back. And slowly, these are emotional regulation skills that we need to teach them, which happens by these little experiences that happen every day. We need to teach them in every moment that this is something that they are expected to be able to contain. So not in a way that we pressurize them, but teaching them to take a breath, to take a minute, to pause, to come back to an argument or a situation after a while. All of these ways will help them to develop this for the next time around. So that's how we can handle the lack of emotional regulation skills. So that's the third one. Now the fourth one I'm going to talk to you about is feeling unseen or unheard. Sometimes it could be the younger sibling in the house, or it could be that there's a lot of stress going on at home and you end up having all of these intense conversations, or the adults are always engaged in something, and the child's voice or the child's needs, their frustrations or their dreams or whatever is important to them, because it really feels small to us. But a lot of times what we do is unconsciously we end up reducing their needs, or how we end up telling our kids, oh, that is so cute, oh, when she's angry she's so cute. Unconsciously sometimes it can actually be harmful, because we are reducing their needs, their voice. We are not able to give them the space to actually feel seen by us, feel heard by us. And that will require us to actually pause, stay present, and really be curious, because they will know if you're just listening for the heck of it. But if you can stay present, if you can stay curious and really be interested in what they're saying, what matters to them, that can make a huge difference. So that's the fourth one. Feeling unseen or unheard is an emotional trigger that we need to watch out for. And the fifth one is to do with trauma or a major life change. If you lost a loved one, if somebody they were close to or attached to has moved away, or you have moved houses, or they have moved from one school to the other, or even a bullying situation at school, something that may seem a little bit small to you can sometimes actually have a significant impact, especially with sensitive kids. They are not necessarily appearing sensitive all the time, so don't be fooled. Even strong-willed kids who appear very headstrong tend to be very sensitive, because they have this very big sense of justice, within them. And those are the kids who actually end up getting affected by something that maybe you don't realize or understand. And if you ask the question, why is my kid being so difficult, instead of asking the question, what is going on with them, then you have lost the chance to be able to help them. And in the process, even when you're trying to handle their bad behavior, you're also going to lose out, because it's just going to create more stress unless you are able to really figure out what's going on with them. So, what major life change might they have gone through? What is something that might be affecting them indirectly? Again, a lot of times they don't realize it. So, it's something that really needs some probing, some curiosity, some open questioning, and really giving them the space where you are present and you're listening, because that really will help them as well to process their feelings, open up, and talk about what might be going on for them, which might be really bothering them. So I will review these 5 emotional triggers that we talked about. One is anxiety and stress related meltdowns, maybe some avoidance or hyperactivity. The other one is unmet needs. Maybe they're hungry, they're overtired, or they're overstimulated. The next one is the lack of emotional regulation skills that we really need to teach them slowly. The fourth one is feeling unseen or unheard, where in your family maybe they don't feel like they're getting a voice. And the last one is about trauma or major life changes that might be happening, which is really affecting them. So far, we've talked about how all bad behavior is a sign, and that if you ask the right question about whether there is something else going on here that I'm not able to understand, if you're able to stay curious, then you can really start to understand what that clue is that your child is really trying to express but unable to. We've also understood that bad behavior comes out because their ability to process their feelings, or the size of their feelings, is way bigger than their necessary skill set to be able to handle it, or their ability to regulate themselves at that moment. So those big feelings actually take over and end up showing as bad behavior. We have also understood what are the causes, possible emotional root causes for all of those bad behaviors that we most commonly see. I hope that this is something that actually starts to give you perspective, because studies show that if parents are able to understand where the child is coming from, even that can make a really big difference in how we view them, and as a result how they feel about themselves, and how well they are able to cope with these bad or difficult feelings, these bad behaviors or difficult feelings. So let's talk about what is it that we can do to actually handle these behaviors that can be very difficult. The first thing that I want to tell you is to stay curious, not furious. This is something that we need to remind ourselves of over and over again, because curiosity is not something that comes naturally to us. It's something that we really need to develop, because our first instinct can actually be either to get affected by that bad behavior, or get affected by this thing that they have done, maybe in public or even at home. Sometimes we are already overwhelmed and frustrated, and that can really actually add to what they are telling us and create this effect. But if in that moment we can remember that this is something else, that this is a clue to something else, we can remind ourselves to stay curious, and that will really help to open up the doors and find a solution, instead of closing the doors and creating more pain, confusion, and stress for both of you. The next thing that we can do is to co-regulate first. Now, our first instinct when they actually, show up in a bad, with a bad behavior, is to actually get worked up or annoyed, irritated. Also, sometimes we end up reacting, right? So, what is it that we can do in that moment? It's obviously going to be hard for us to connect with them, because if they're already in the middle of a tantrum or a meltdown, or they're being avoidant, a lot of times they're being defensive. You just said something which was actually pretty harmless, but the child had a reaction to it, they got defensive. So, what can you do in that moment? You can take a step back and try to co-regulate with them. You can say, okay, wow, that was a lot. I just, wanted to ask you something, and seems like, that really got you off, or, that really affected you. Let's take a minute here. Maybe I came off the wrong way, or maybe there was something that affected you. Can we take a minute here to just, restart? You can hold hands, you can hug, you can just look at the child, or, sit and take a breath together. Whatever helps you to remind yourself and them to regulate first, because the more we regulate with them and teach them to actually have a calmer, more healthy reaction to something, the more they are able to actually learn that and develop that within themselves going forward. So when we have practiced that with them enough number of times, that is something that will get internalized for them and help them to regulate themselves in the future. So regulating along with your child is the second thing that you could do. What's the next thing that you could do? You can teach them emotional vocabulary. A lot of times their big feelings are getting so difficult to handle because they don't have the language to process it, even sometimes to themselves. They are unable to tell themselves or name their own feelings. So a lot of times practicing this along with your family, or talking to each other about things that you feel, using emotion words in your everyday language, will really help to get everybody to understand their own feelings better, to express themselves better. Every time they express themselves, you can recognize that and say, oh, that really makes it very clear how you're feeling. You're just noticing. You're just noticing what your child has done, and that will teach them to actually develop that vocabulary and be able to express themselves more better and be cut that out. And you're just teaching them the emotional vocabulary to be able to express their feelings more often, because research shows that when you use language and when you name emotions, you are able to handle them way better, because you're actually engaging the prefrontal cortex, which will help the child to regulate themselves and have a more logical reaction or response to the situation. And if they're able to express their needs using the words that will help them to express what's going on internally, it is also more likely that they will be able to ask for help where needed and ask for what they really need before the time that it actually becomes so big and starts to snowball into a bad behavior. The next thing that you can do is to model that healthy regulation yourself. So if there is a moment where things get too much for you, they have screamed, they have yelled, and you have already tried to stay patient and they're really testing your patience, you can actually tell them, I need a minute here. I will come back to you. And just walk to the next room. Compose yourself, take a breath, do whatever it takes to help yourself to come back to that regulated state, so that you can then be there for your child. And you know what your child will learn in the process? That this is the way to have a healthy regulation skill for whatever their emotions are, and that they don't have to be scared of their big emotions. There's always going to be ways to actually regulate it, especially if you've practiced it over and over again. So if you model this is something that they imbibe from you and learn from you as well. And the last thing that I want to tell you about what you can do is to remember to have connection before correction. I know this is something that you would probably have been reminded of a lot of times in a lot of parenting literature. However, a lot of times parents feel that they are connecting with their child, whereas they're probably not really creating connection. Connection also includes trust, and trust comes from the child feeling and knowing that you really believe in them, that what they say to you matters, and that their presence is something that really matters to you and in your family, that their presence really adds to your family's vibe. These are things that are very important for them to actually feel connected, to feel like they belong to your family, and create a lot of security within them. So try these out. I'm going to quickly recap for you. Stay curious, not furious. Co-regulate with them first. Teach them emotional vocabulary. Model healthy reactions to these different, very overwhelming feelings. And last, connection before correction. I will see you guys very soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Words stick. And sometimes it's those ones that we don't even think about twice that hurt the most. Think of that teenager who still walks with a hunch in her back because years ago she overheard her aunt saying, "She's so awkward and lanky." Those words were not even meant to be cruel, but she sees herself the same way even now. Or the kid who struggled with math and their relative joked, "Oh, he's hopeless with numbers." And since then, he never even felt good enough to try. When our kids overhear us talking about them or see and understand from our expressions and body language that maybe we are not happy with something they're doing or saying, it really leaves a mark. Here's the thing, kids don't need to be perfect, they just need to know their strengths. We are often well intentioned about correcting them, but what they end up hearing are a lot of negatives. Why can't you sit still? You're too stubborn. Can you stop crying? When they're constantly hearing that, when they're constantly hearing what they're doing wrong, it really messes with their confidence. But when they hear us talking about what's right, even when they're in the room, it really gives them the belief. When they're constantly hearing things about what is wrong with them, they are really losing confidence. But when we talk about what's right, then it really helps them to see themselves in a better light and recognize their own strength. Maybe you will say that, "Wow, you're so creative. How can we use this to solve this particular problem in math?" Or if they're sensitive, we can celebrate their empathy and teach them how to use it to connect with others. Or if they're stubborn, instead of looking at it as defiance, we can really recognize their persistence in achieving goals. This is not about giving empty praise, but to really help them to see their own strengths and show them how to use those strengths to face challenges. Let's make sure that they overhear things that lift them up, words that can help them see how incredible they are. Whether you say it to them, whether you feel it in the way you look at them, or you talk to them, or you talk those words with somebody else and they overhear it. These are great ways that we can really build up our children